Let's speak to the Gauteng Labour Department Chief Inspector now, Advocate Michael Msiza, who joins me in studio tonight. Advocate Msiza, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. Let's begin with how you learnt about this factory. What made you decide to go and inspect it unannounced?
Good evening, Mr. Mgambi, and good evening to the viewers. Indeed, we got a tip-off last week, and we had to respond accordingly to make sure that we inspect this company. A tip-off was saying that 4 of the employees that were employed by the company, or former employees, were injured, and those injuries were not reported to the department. And it was further alleged that their injuries were so serious that they had their fingers amputated, and that is why we responded today.
So when you got there today, what did you find on the shop floor? Because one of the things I noticed from my colleague, Zinego Mhlaba, who was on the story, is that they are wearing face masks. At least he's wearing a face mask. Is it poisonous inside there, the chemicals? Is it a chemical factory? What exactly?
Yes, it's a factory that is manufacturing plates, disposable plates, and therefore it is hazardous to a certain extent. That is why you saw them wearing a mask and wearing also PPEs. But we are told that it's something that they've just implemented recently after they've realized that we have received a tip-off. And when we went there, unfortunately, the employer was not complying to any piece of legislation, to an extent that even in terms of occupational health and safety, that actually made us to visit that company, is that even a mere DP box is not installed in terms of the standards, to an extent that we had to prohibit all the 3 DP boxes that are used there, because even the labeling that is there is not in accordance with the law. It's labeled in Mandarin, and therefore it will not assist in terms of safety rules that are applicable in the country. We went further to check compliance with regard to the compensation fund legislation, because we got tip-off that people were injured. Then we had to check if those people will be covered by the legislation. And unfortunately, on arrival, we found that the employer did not have any records, despite agreeing that they were working there and indeed that they were injured. As a result, the employer has not declared their injuries, has not reported their injuries to the department, and has not even made sure that the company is registered with us, and there is submission of annual earnings, return of earnings, to ensure that whoever that is injured at the company will then be taken care of. And also in terms of unemployment legislation, it's not that company is not known to have registered, declared, and paid contributions. And worse, the company is using a labor broker who does not even know how to write a contract of employment, to the extent that those contracts do not even comply. And he classifies everybody as a general employee, despite the fact that we have realized that there are packers, there are drivers, and there are other employees like cleaners and other categories, but to them it's just general employee across the board. Whereas also we realized that, or we made aware that at least there are 3 people that were working without work permits, 2 of them Chinese nationals, and 1 of them a driver from Zimbabwe. Also, they couldn't prove that they had work permits to be in the country. So in general, the employer complies with nothing.
So let's sum it up then, before we talk the consequences for whoever is running this factory. The company itself, is it operating illegally? If so, what about the employment conditions? Because clearly they are appalling. So is this a illegal operation, and are workers being exploited?
Well, we did not have the Department of Trade and Industry as part of our joint inspection today. It will have established if indeed it's legal. But what we'll do, we'll also check that part going forward to say, in terms of the legislation that governs companies' registration, is it legal or not? But in terms of our legislation, we had to check if he complies with the employment law, and we found that it's not compliant at all. And indeed, it means that those employees would not be covered, or will have been in danger of not be covered had we not discovered that there is such non-compliance, because then we'll have to make sure that even those that were injured are covered retrospectively, because it was not out of their own making.
So on the face of it, there are a lot of transgressions by the people running that factory. What are the possible consequences? In fact, let's talk about today. When you left the operation, did you insist that the doors be shut, or is it another department's duty to do that?
Well, we prohibited the use of DP boxes, like I said, which will then stop the operation because all those machines are linked to those DP boxes. And we ordered that within 60 days, before he could then start operating, he has to conduct a medical surveillance on all those employees because of their exposure that they had on chemicals. And there is no proof that he has a risk assessment and that he assessed those risks to an extent that he would know what dangers are there in the workplace. So that's what we did. But we also issued a lot of compliance orders to make sure that all those employees are covered in terms of their employment insurance, that there are declarations, that there are payments, and that he will have to pay penalties and interest after we shall have made our calculations. But beyond that, we'll have to then pursue, after investigating the injury of those employees, a criminal route in terms of non-reporting of the injured employees.
Again, I repeat, that's a lot of transgressions, and you include in that people who couldn't prove that they are in South Africa legally. How confident are you that you are going to find this person that's running that operation when you go back there tomorrow or the following day?
Well, we will have to be confident should it happen that we find the employee, like we are saying, because in most cases, yes. Others, when we shut down their companies, then we don't get them the following day. Others, we had to order their arrest when we are with the Department of Home Affairs. The absence of the Department of Home Affairs could have created a bit of a challenge in that regard, because had we found that, yes, they are in the country legally, then they would have been arrested. We'll be talking now that they would be behind bars. But because we are discharging different mandates, we've got to be confident to say we'll have to then continue the investigation with other sister departments, and we hope that they would be there. But in case they are not there, it means at the end of the day they would not continue to operate, because all what we've got to make sure that it doesn't happen is for companies to operate and not flaunt labor laws to an extent that the employees are not covered. And for us, the protection of employees is the key or a responsibility that we must discharge as government.
Let's talk in general terms now, outside of what you found in this specific factory. How often do you go to companies of your own volition to say, we're here to inspect unannounced, and do you only rely perhaps on tip-offs, much like what you did today?
No, not at all. We do have inspections that we plan ourselves. We do have joint inspections that we plan ourselves. We do have blitz inspections that we plan ourselves. The difference is the approach that we are making, and most of the time, the inspections that are covered by the media are the joint inspections, because we go there with sister departments and we coordinate across the board in terms of the legislations that we are covering. Unlike on day-to-day running, where you will have an OHS inspector getting into a company and inspecting alone, or you'll have a basic conditions of employment inspector inspecting alone. So, but in this case, in joint inspections, that's where we then mobilize resources from the Department of Home Affairs, from the police, from trade and industry, from SARS, whoever that will be there to join. And in that way, it becomes easy, because then we can be able to approach a certain sector or certain companies as a joint effort. And in that way, we'll then be able to establish non-compliance in the manner that we have established today, because then it will be covering a lot of legislation and a lot of mandates of different sister departments.
You prompt my final question. So today was not a joint operation.
It was a joint operation.
It was a joint operation.
Yes, it's just that we did not have all the departments, but it was a joint operation.
All right, but you have since discovered a lot of wrongs that are going on there.
Yes.
How soon can you return to that factory? Because people are at risk if indeed they decide to operate illegally. But second of all, there are those who are seriously injured and are going to be, probably they desperately need compensation right now, because they need those monies for medical care. How soon can you return there so that these people don't lose out?
In terms of our legislation, we have different time periods to go back there. In terms of other pieces of legislation, like the basic conditions of employment and national minimum wage, we gave them a compliance order that will last for 14 days. With regard to occupational health and safety, 60 days. With regard to the insurance, unemployment insurance fund and compensation fund is 30 days. But in this case, we are obliged by law to continue investigation as early as tomorrow, because then there are people that are injured, and we must make sure that those injured people are covered by legislation. That is why our investigation will start as early as tomorrow. So we'll be frequenting the company to make sure that we get all the details around the injury of those 4 people. That's what will prompt us then to be there as early as tomorrow and continuously until that investigation is finalized.
Advocate Michael Msiza, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so
very worrying developments indeed.